minutes or so. So just to introduce myself, my name is Joe Brunwin. I am Policy and Public Affairs Lead for England at RCOT. So during the session, we're focused on how we can influence decision makers, thinking mainly about how we can affect policies that are made on a national scale that influence occupational therapy and the wider profession. So we've called it a café. That's because we want to use it as an opportunity to share views and ideas and get the conversation going, just as you might do in a cafe. So while we do have some excellent speakers lined up, we also want to keep this two-way as well and hear from you. So just before we go to the first person for remarks, a bit of housekeeping. We will be recording the session so that those who couldn't make it today can watch it back. So just if anybody does not want to be on the recording, I'd advise you to turn your camera off now. Throughout the session, we're also going to be posing questions in the chat. So please do keep an eye out, interact with the chat function. We've got a couple of polls that we're lining up. I think Lisa's ready to press go on the first poll right about now. So please do take a look and respond to that as well. And then finally, if you are speaking during the discussion parts of the session, please do introduce yourself. Let us know your role and where you're calling in from as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Taya, who is our head of profile and campaigns, and is going to touch on a bit of background to this session, why we're here today, including an overview of our 12-month campaign, The Power of OT. Go ahead, Taya.
Thanks, Joe, and hello everyone. As Joe said, I'm Taya Healy. I head up our profile and campaigns team. This cafe is one in a series that we've launched that are here to support you raise the profile of occupational therapy and where it needs to be positioned for maximum impact, as well as to influence the change to make that happen. The cafe series works hand in hand with the toolbox we launched last month, OT Week, and the toolbox covers how to prepare and share a story, ideas around acting locally, being a media spokesperson, as well as using social media. And of course, the focus of today's session around influencing decision makers. As the toolbox also works with the Power of Occupational Therapy campaign resources. In the campaign resources, you'll find a narrative and material to help you give you the key messages and the information to help support your influencing activities. So this year's change in OT Week was about the fact that actually, rather than just being a week-long campaign, it's launching a year-long campaign. So we'll be carrying out activities over the year, and we'll be supporting you to do that as well. So that's enough for me, but we'll be staying around. So any other questions or anything anyone's got, please pop them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer there. Back over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Taya. Appreciate that. So I'm just going to add a word on our workforce strategy, which some of you may have seen was published earlier this year, which sets out our priorities and our vision for the OT profession to the year 2035. One of our core priorities of the workforce strategy is around optimizing occupational therapy, which means equipping practitioners with the skills to be change makers. And that's one of the real reasons why we're here today on this Skillshare session. Our vision is for a workforce which is based primarily in communities focused on early interventions and prevention, where we feel that we can have most impact for populations. And you'll hear later that our vision is very much aligned to the direction of travel in national policy making at the moment across all 4 nations. So there's a real big opportunity to present occupational therapy as a solution to many of the challenges which the nation is facing at the present. Now, whilst you ponder that, I'm just going to share some slides on my screen, as for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing influencing local decision makers. So if you bear with me a moment. Okay. Taya, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Excellent. Okay, so when we're talking about decision makers, that does sound quite broad. For the purposes of this session, we're going to focus on elected representatives. So that means your member of parliament if you're in England. It means your National Assembly member or member of your national executive in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. However, it's really important also to note that influencing isn't just confined to those big conversations with MPs or national leaders. It happens every day, really, at every level. It happens with patients, it happens with colleagues, it happens with senior leaders and staff. And why we're focusing on it today? Well, the UK government and devolved administrations play a really important role in shaping policy, legislation and funding decisions that affect public services, including in health and social care. So, for example, there's lots of policies that I could refer to, whether it's the Care Act or the Long-Term Workforce Plan, the 10-year health plan that we'll be looking ahead to later on in this session. You have policies in each of the nations. You have the National Care Service in Scotland, for example, which is under development at the moment. The Additional Roles Reimbursement Scheme, which is around primary care in England. So all examples of policies that are made on a national level, which will in fact impact practitioners across the UK. And when I'm talking about your local representative, I'm talking about your local member of parliament. I'm talking about an assembly member, a member of Scottish Parliament, or member of Legislative Assembly. And they really are your link to those who shape policy. They're responsible for bringing the voices of their constituents into national discussions in each national parliament. Many are really, really keen to hear from professionals like yourselves, because your insights ground their understanding of how national policies that I've referred to translate into real world outcomes. And with a new government in the UK this year and elections coming up in 2026 in the devolved nations, which isn't in fact too far away, we feel like now is a really, really important and good time to be lobbying your local representative about the importance of OT. So that's why we've published some tips this year on what you might want to do to engage with them and influence national policy. Some of these are simple things that if you only have 5 or 10 minutes to do, you can action. Others may take a little bit more time if you're able to give that to get involved. So, for example, you can send your MP an email about a specific issue. You can ask them to raise it with the government for a response. You could also request a meeting. So representatives are often in their constituency doing meetings every Friday and are very open to hearing from you. We have an online email template via the links that have been shared, which you can use to save some of your time. But also some of the best ways to get politicians involved is to invite them to come along to your service, really just to see firsthand the power of occupational therapy in their communities. Again, we've got a step-by-step guide online, which sets out some of the key thoughts and considerations that you might want to think about if you're interested in having a local representative out to see you in a service. And finally, you can also respond to consultations. So consultations are happening thick and fast at the moment. Select committees, which are cross-party groups of MPs, are putting them out all of the time. Also, government departments run consultations, and in the second half of the session, we'll be hearing from somebody in the Department of Health and Social Care about the 10-year plan consultation, which is ongoing at the moment. So you might be wondering, what do I need to consider if I'm engaging with my local representative? So this slide, and we will share these slides after the call, sets out some of those considerations. I should reflect that the good thing is that you will be most of the way there already. You as OTs will naturally use the skills to influence people on a day-to-day. You have to explain things clearly and concisely. You have to use evidence to back up your decisions. You'll have to adjust your message depending on the individual that you're talking to on a day-to-day. So I'm not going to run through each one of these because there's quite a lot here, and hopefully we'll get through some of them when we get to the discussion part. But I did want to pull out a few bits which I think are really important. You'll want to think about what their priorities are. and show how your service or how your work can help them deliver that. You can do that by looking at what the government's priorities are. You can also read about your local representative and what their key priorities in their local area are by looking on their website or looking on their social media. It's also really important to consider your evidence and how you can promote this. So this can be outcomes that you've measured over a series of time, or it can be using first-person case studies which demonstrate directly how people using your service or people that you've been working with have been affected or benefited by occupational therapy. Really important to be really clear and concise. Don't be too jargony. Remember that MPs or assembly members are people too. So speak to them like that on that level. And also, it's really important just to be patient. Rome wasn't built in a day. There's a reason why our workforce strategy is to the year 2035 and not to the year 2025. It's because influencing does take time. So do be patient, but also be ready to be persistent in a respectful way. So if you are writing to your local member of parliament, and if you don't get a response in 3 or 4 weeks, don't be deterred. Just send them a message or send them an email to follow up and ask where they get for an update on your inquiry. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm conscious of that. As I said, it's a cafe, so I'm going to come off screen now and invite any thoughts from those in the room, any reflections. So I guess my first question is whether or not anybody's had any contact with their local representatives before, and if so, how did it go? You wanted to come in, I'll look for any hands up if you wanted to raise your hand and make any reflections. Maybe Lisa or Taya, if there's any comments in the chat. Hi, Lisa.
Hiya. Yes, I did contact it was a candidate actually at that point before he was elected. We had a change to our constituency, so I contacted him as when he was a candidate rather than before he was elected, and kind of just opened the conversation. I haven't contacted him again since, so I suppose any tips on how to kind of reopen that conversation would be great.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and I think it's not uncommon, and I'm quite regularly emailing MPs or election representatives to try and get meetings, and sometimes it just takes 2 or 3 weeks to actually get a response because there is an enormous amount of case study that is involved in being a representative. But I think, as I reflected before, it is just a case of being a bit persistent sometimes and reminding them about your initial inquiry and seeing if there's an update on it. But I think also that people should be considering if they are planning to make an approach to their local representative to really make the case why meeting with you or engaging with occupational therapy is important. And that's about thinking about how occupational therapy can help deliver on some of the priorities of what the government has or what some of their local priorities are, because really you are, when you're approaching your local representative, you're making a case to them. You're making an argument that they should be spending their time or thinking about engaging and supporting you. So I think there's part of it is thinking about how you frame an initial approach, but also just being quite persistent and be ready to follow up or maybe put a call in, but also recognizing that they'll have an enormous amount of work and casework that they'll be getting through. So just being quite respectful in that regard as well.
Thank you. You're right. I suppose that aligning with their priorities is a good way to go about it so that they can see why it would be useful for them as much as us asking things from them.
I was just
Has it?
Joe,
Go on, Taya.
and on our website, Lisa, you'll also see where we've made comments on recent statements and things like that from the government. So things like that might be useful to refer to. And I'll pop some links in the chat here, so you might find some of those useful. Sorry, that just occurred to me, Joe. And there's a question from Georgia in the chat for you.
Yeah, I've just seen George's message, who writes, I'm employed by an NHS trust. Do I need to get permission or go through comms before contacting my MP? We would recommend that you do engage with your comms team before engaging with your MP, especially if it's around if you're interested in encouraging them to come for a service visit. There may be support that your comms team will be able to provide, or advice or recommendations, and to help you walk through that process. So I think first and foremost, it is important to make sure that you involve them and let them know that you're interested in engaging your local representative. But also, if you are interested in doing a service visit, then do reach out to us as well. We can be a resource to you. We can provide some more guidance, whether it's on the specific stakeholder or member of parliament or representative that you're looking to engage. We're very, very happy to support with that. So if you would like that extra additional help, then do reach out to us on practice.workforce@rcot.co.uk. But yeah, good question. It's always really important to make sure that everybody's brought along as you're doing this. We do actually have Lyndsey on the call, who had a visit from a minister, not a minister from the new government not so long ago. So I wonder if I can bring in Lyndsey to share some reflections if she's there. And just while she's talking, perhaps some of us can have a bit of a think about if there's any further comments or questions or thoughts, but either to myself, to my colleagues, or Lyndsey when she comes on. So Lyndsey, are you there? Yeah, I see you. How are you doing, Lyndsey?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Joe. How are you?
Yeah, very, very good, thanks. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. As I mentioned, Lyndsey's from Sport for Confidence. I'll hand over to you, Lyndsey, just to introduce Sport for Confidence. But also if you can reflect on your recent visit from the Sports Minister and how that went.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I just wonder if anybody is able to put their camera on, that would be great, just because I find it really hard talking to screens without faces. I know Lisa's here because I heard your question, Lisa. Ah, there we go. Thank you all. I'm not a fan of presenting anyway, so it's nice to see smiles. Yeah, so as Joe said, I am from Sport for Confidence. I'm the lead occupational therapist there. I was in the NHS for 16 years prior to that, and I've been doing this for the last 9 years. So we're predominantly based in Essex, in lots of different places and spaces, but we also have a national team, which Lisa is part of. So we're in Sheffield and now all over the place. Obviously, I'm an occupational therapist. I'm actually based in a leisure centre in Basildon, although I do work in different areas too. And recently, at the end of October, I was contacted to see whether the Sports Minister could come and visit us. This is perhaps our third fairly important visit. In 2018, we had the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge come and visit as well. And these sort of visits absolutely terrify me, if I'm being completely honest, Joe, although I'm not going to put people off from doing them. But I was contacted to say the Sports Minister wanted to come. I was given a briefing from the organisation that had asked me to be part of it, which is Active Essex. And I was given just a few key sentences about why she was coming. And obviously there was nothing in there about occupational therapy, but there was a lot in there about prevention and the role that sport and physical activity can play. I would share with you probably the most helpful thing about the visit, and I'm not just saying it because he's here, was the support that I then received from Joe in preparation. So I don't know a great deal about ministers, and my political knowledge is perhaps not great. And I just wanted to make sure I made the most of that opportunity and that I was on message, and that I guess most importantly, I was able to share the voices of the people I was supporting in a way that the minister would want to engage with us. And I think the information that I got beforehand and the briefing from Joe, and it was on your do's and don'ts slide actually, Joe, was just crucial. Knowing, I guess, a bit of background about Stephanie Peacock, where her interests were, what she'd done previously, helped me in all of my conversations. The don't, not assuming that she was there and 100% on board with everything that I was going to be talking about, and that she has a big profile and she has a lot of things that she's responsible for, also helped me prepare. And then I guess on the day, one of the most helpful things was just having two key messages, that if everything else went wrong, what was it I wanted to be able to say and I guess demonstrate during her short time with us, and it was quite a short time. So the briefing and that pre-information was absolutely crucial in helping me be confident enough to have those conversations.
I should say as well that I've been out to Sport for Confidence to see Lyndsey in action, and I'd be very confident in her delivering all of this without the support from RCOT, because she's absolutely brilliant, and an excellent exemplar of the profession, as I'm sure many of you on the call are as well. So I was just wondering, Lyndsey, in terms of what on the day you feel helped you make the case to the sports minister. What were the sorts of things that maybe resonated with her? What was she particularly interested in? If you can maybe talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. I guess the two key things at the front of my mind were about demonstrating the value of the profession and an opportunity to talk about occupational therapy. But sitting above that, and I think I've touched on it, was around elevating the voices of people with lived experience, the people that we're actually working with, and how could I do that in a really powerful way that she went away and she was thinking about us after the visit. So I think for me, setting up the visit in a way that she would be meeting people that I work with, meeting people in my caseload, and creating, it's very OT, activities that she would then engage with alongside those individuals so she could have conversations, was really, really important to me. And I think also to help with the success of the visit, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Joe, so I've gone a bit off piece, was having just key points that I knew I could talk about with confidence around prevention and around the new government and where we sit. And interestingly, the visit itself was very tricky because her timings were off for lots of different reasons, and it looked like I was expecting her to arrive at a set time, and then they delayed it by an hour, which meant all of my participants would have gone home. So I was absolutely devastated having done this preparation. Fortunately, we managed to move things around, and she did get to come into our sessions and meet people. But I thought in that moment, when all else goes wrong, what is it I need to share with her, and how can I focus on that? And yeah, that's what we did. And just being able to go, I've got 10 seconds. How do I explain occupational therapy and link that to prevention in a way that she's going to remember me? That was the mission, which hopefully we achieved.
That's great, Lyndsey. And yeah, I think the way that you linked it to the government's priority around prevention is really important. We'll hear from Kit from DHSC shortly around some of the work that the government are doing around the 10-year health plan at the moment. And yeah, clearly a lot of focus is on prevention. So really demonstrating the value of occupational therapy in regards to preventing ill health were clearly resonated and was a really smart way to pitch that visit. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think on the other point that you mentioned on is that preparation is really important for these sorts of visits, but MPs are often have quite difficult, especially ministers have a lot of obligations, and often things can change at relatively short notice. So I think preparing is really important, but just being ready that some things do change. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the world's going to fall in or anything like that. It's just being ready to be agile on the day for these sorts of visits is really important. Was there any other kind of thoughts or reflections that you had, Lyndsey, to add?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I wanted to share is that I kind of worried a little bit beforehand about my words and making sure I was saying the right thing. And I put a lot of pressure on myself, this responsibility to do a good job and to represent the profession. But actually, in the moment, I think being your authentic self and just letting your actions probably speak loudest. And I think at one point I was so kind of excited to share everything with her. I did stop and say, I'm really sorry, I think I'm talking at you, but I'm really excited. And that was the first time she smiled, because she was quite serious. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to say to her, I'm so excited, I've got so much to tell you. Our profession's amazing, and I want to talk to you about it. As soon as I stopped trying to use the right words and just fell into hopefully being myself and talking with passion, I felt much more comfortable. I think the other thing, at the end of the visit, unexpectedly, her PR people said, "Oh, we'd like to film you now with some questions." And again, like the fear of, oh my goodness, now I'm going to be filmed potentially asking questions wrong. But just able to regroup. And actually I said to Joe afterwards when I debriefed, I just said, "Oh, could you give me 5 minutes first?" And I just went and sat and looked back through my briefing and my preparation, took a moment. They were happy to wait for those 5 minutes and then to go back in and confidently ask the questions, because you do feel under pressure. But actually any additional interviews and footage, they were quite open to me saying, I just need a moment. What questions are you going to ask me? Could I have all the photos? Could I have the videos afterwards, please? It just helped me feel a bit calmer in that moment when the camera came on to be talking about the profession. But yeah, they're my reflections. I hope they're helpful. It was, although these things, the anticipatory anxiety is pretty tricky, just such a brilliant opportunity to talk about the work that we do and how wonderful the profession is, and to demonstrate the life-changing difference it makes. I would say seize those opportunities if they come, even though they're quite terrifying.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lyndsey. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And I think you're just remembering a lot of the time that you're speaking to another person, and it doesn't matter if they have a couple of letters after their name or have a title. It's just person to person, and you are the best representatives for the profession by being your authentic selves, and remembering that is really important. And you give quite a good segue as well, Lyndsey, mentioning about the video. I hope you don't mind if we do post your video, because I think it's absolutely fantastic the way that you articulate OT within a 90-second video. So hopefully we can get a link to that in the chat as well, for others to see after the call. We've got 5 minutes until the next agenda item. So I don't know if anybody had any further reflections or managed to pause and reflect on what Lyndsey's discussed, or maybe indeed have a question for Lyndsey to answer. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Great to have this opportunity today to reflect on sort of our influence and profile raising. I just wanted to draw on a comment I posted in the chat. I was fortunate enough to be hosting an event during OT week just gone, and found the RCOT resources that I found online really beneficial to help with that. I didn't have long to pull the event together, and it was a place-based event, so occupational therapists across all sorts of organisational boundaries coming together for a real community event to collect and celebrate the transformational power that we have in health and social care. And with that, we had a newly elected Member of Parliament in our area. So on the off chance, I did reach out to her and was really delighted to get a response and to get an acceptance to the event. And a little bit like Lyndsey was saying there, I think finding something that resonates with that person, their role, and what occupational therapy can do to help their campaign or their agenda was really helpful to I think to sort of tie her into the event and to get her attendance. It was quite a challenge, as Lyndsey said, in terms of sort of the timings and the commitment, and trying to work quite agilely, and also around sort of security arrangements as well. That posed another challenge in terms of promotion of their attendance at the event. However, it was really very warmly received, her attendance. We had a really useful and productive and constructive discussion with her around some of the items that were relevant to occupational therapy and that we knew she had been discussing in Parliament and was very articulate about in the local area, about SEND and health inequalities, and really trying to position occupational therapy with that, I think, was really valuable. Following the event, I used the RCOT briefing paper to follow up in an email to her, along with some of the attendees' comments that they had submitted
That's great, Elizabeth. That's what we're all here for. That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. It sounds like a really productive conversation, a bit of engagement. So great to see you having those conversations locally as well.
Thank you.
I'm just I've seen a comment in the chat, I believe from Joe, who mentions, I'm a newly qualified OT working in a Royal Emerging setting in North Wales. We had a visit in the summer from the newly elected MP. He was very excited by our work, but was very much of the, well, it's a devolved issue school of thought. Is there any tips or words of advice for turning that narrative around, please? I don't know if it's a genius tip, but I think a couple of things to reflect on this question. Firstly is that you may want to gently remind them that funding decisions are decisions made by the government in the UK. And that has a knock-on effect in terms of the budgets that national governments, whether it's the Welsh Assembly or other, the Welsh government or other governments have in terms of the amount of spending that they have. And secondly, I suppose it underscores the importance of engaging widely. So it's good to have your local MP on board if you're in one of the devolved nations, but also you may want to go ahead and engage with your local assembly member as well, who may have a bit more say over policy making as it regards to health and social care in your nation. I think those would be the couple of things that I'd reflect on, but